The sun stretched low across the lawns of Woodbridge Academy, spilling soft amber light over the brick walls and manicured hedges. Everything here seemed designed to whisper legacy. The carved stone archways, the bronze plaques commemorating generations past, the quiet hum of wealth moving beneath the silence. And into this picture-perfect frame stepped Nyla and Nia Thompson. They walked side by side, uniforms crisp, posture proud, hair braided with care and dignity. At first glance, they might have appeared simply composed, two new students arriving at a prestigious school. But a closer look would reveal the undercurrent in their stride, a stillness forged in tension, a poise sharpened by preparation. Because the moment they crossed the wrought iron gates, they felt it, the weight of 1,000 eyes. They had always been stared at. That was nothing new. But this was different. This wasn't curiosity. It was a calculation. The stares weren't asking, "Who are they?" They were stating, "We know who they're not." They didn't belong. Not here. Not in the eyes of the students lounging on the steps. Not in the murmurs that followed them through the courtyard. Not in the tone of the security guard who had double-checked their admission letters without smiling. Nyla didn't flinch. She had expected this. Her sister, Nia, beside her, gripped the strap of her backpack just a little tighter. The sun caught the edge of her jaw where her tension showed like stone beneath smooth skin. Still, her steps matched Nyla's, deliberate even, unhurried. They had rehearsed this moment without even realizing it. Every day their father had trained them, not just in martial arts, but in the art of being unshakable, of walking into rooms where they were unwelcome and leaving those same rooms with their heads higher than when they entered. Malcolm Thompson didn't raise his daughters to be invisible. He raised them to walk like they knew who they were, because the world would try to tell them otherwise. As they passed a marble bench near the entrance, a voice cut through the murmuring hush, loud, smug, and meant to be heard. "New students?" the boy called, his voice oiled with mockery. "Didn't know we were letting in tourists this year." Laughter from a small group of boys in tailored blazers, lounging like kings in a court they believed was theirs. The leader, golden-haired, square-jawed, dripping confidence, grinned as if he had delivered something clever. Logan Whitmore. Nyla glanced toward him, not long enough to invite further bait, but just enough to see his smirk and memorize it. Her gaze lingered 1 second, then moved on. Nia exhaled slowly through her nose. Not a sigh, a recalibration. "Keep walking," she whispered. "He's just noise." "I know," Nyla replied, "but I heard him." They stepped inside the main building, where cold air greeted them like a slap. The halls were spotless, trophy cases gleamed, the scent of freshly polished wood hovered beneath the faint tang of hand sanitizer. Everything about the place was meticulous, and yet nothing felt welcoming. Everywhere they turned, students paused, glances slid sideways, conversations stumbled, whispers took root like ivy against the walls. And still, they walked. They didn't hunch, didn't speed up, didn't retreat. They walked like their father taught them, like queens without crowns. As they reached their home room, Nyla placed her hand on the doorknob, but didn't open it immediately. Instead, she looked at her sister. "You ready?" Nia gave a small nod. "I've been ready." The door swung open, revealing a classroom full of students whose eyes locked onto them like searchlights. The teacher didn't greet them, just nodded toward two empty seats in the back, the kind of nod that meant, "Sit, be quiet, don't disturb the order." They crossed the room not with bravado but with grace, even as Logan's voice echoed faintly from somewhere in the hallway. "Guess they're here to clean the trophies, not win them." They didn't react. But inside, the coals were lit. The fire hadn't started yet. But it would, and when it came, it wouldn't be loud. It would be precise, it would be earned, and it would be unstoppable. The hallways of Woodbridge Academy weren't just passageways. They were arenas, Some fights happened with fists. Others happened with glances sharp enough to cut skin. This was the latter kind. The quiet war waged between locker doors and bulletin boards, where silence carried intent and every smirk meant something. Nyla and Nia learned quickly. By the end of their first week, they had mapped the battlefield, where the clusters of entitled laughter always echoed near the East Wing lockers, where teachers turned baw eyes the fastest, the corridor near the science labs, and where Logan Whitmore and his hyenas held court beneath the stained glass skylight, where the sun hit just right and they could see themselves reflected in its glory. The girls said nothing, but they saw everything. They saw how the crowd shifted just enough to block their path, as if by accident. They saw how their names were called in roll without eye contact, how questions they answered were overlooked even when correct. They saw how students stared just a beat too long, then turned away, not in confusion but in decision. They weren't new students. They were targets. "Hey, princesses," a voice called one afternoon as they crossed the central hall. It was Brent, always the first follower, never the thinker. He stepped into their path just enough to make them pause. "Hope you're not too tired from shining our trophies," he sneered. "Heard the cleaning staff's report this week." Nyla didn't stop walking. She sidestepped. Clean, effortless. But Nia, just for a second, turned her head. Her eyes met Brent's. Not angry, not wounded, just steady, like stone. And that scared him more than rage would have. They moved on, their shoulders brushing against rows of lockers that echoed faint metallic groans, like the building itself was growing uncomfortable. By the end of week 2, it got worse. Logan never had to do much. He simply set the tone. The rest followed. A bump here hard enough to knock books loose. A joke there whispered just loud enough to sting, but never loud enough to record. One morning, Nia found a crumpled piece of paper tucked into her locker vent. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She knew hate by its weight. That night, their father noticed it. Malcolm Thompson wasn't the kind of man to hover, but he saw things. The tension in Nyla's jaw, the quietness in Nia's usual hum, the way their hands stayed clenched a few seconds longer than they should have. He didn't ask. He waited. When they finally spoke, it wasn't a flood, just a statement. "They're pushing," Nyla said, eyes down. Malcolm's fork pitched in midair. He set it down gently. "They want you to break," he said. "That's the whole game. Not to hurt you, not yet. Just to stretch you until you snap yourself." Nia looked up. "And if they don't stop?" There was no hesitation in his voice. "Then they'll find out you're not the ones who break." The next morning, something shifted. Nyla and Nia didn't walk faster, didn't dress differently, didn't speak louder, but they stopped pretending. They didn't avoid the clusters of boys anymore. They walked through them. They didn't glance away from the smirks. They stared back. Calm, unshaken. The hallway didn't change, but the current did. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs turned into silence. And silence, when held long enough, becomes fear. Logan watched them one day from across the rotunda. He leaned against the banister, eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to being studied. He was used to being admired, feared, and mimicked. But the way Nyla looked at him now, with surgical precision, with cold calculation, made something shift in his chest. He didn't understand it yet. But he felt it. The tide was changing, and the water had never looked so deep. It was a Thursday morning, the kind where the sky was too blue and the breeze too light. The kind of day that dared you to believe everything was fine. But Nyla and Nia Thompson knew better. They felt it the moment they stepped onto campus. Not in anything obvious, not in shouts or stares. No, in the stillness. The way the hallway quieted was too quick. The way the students stepped aside too early. Like something had been arranged. When they reached their lockers, they saw it. red paint, thick, dripping. Words they had heard whispered before, now scrawled across metal for everyone to read. Slurs, crude jokes, ugly caricatures drawn in marker, lips exaggerated, eyes warped into racist mockery. Someone had taken their time. Crumpled papers jammed through the vents. More hate, more bile, more proof that this wasn't a prank. This was a message around them, laughter. Some are open and loud. Some hid behind their hands and turned their shoulders. But none of it stopped. No teacher stepped in. No students intervened. Phones came out. Photos were taken. The moment was performative, and they were the unwilling center of it. Logan leaned against a locker nearby, arms crossed, wearing a grin so wide it looked almost rehearsed. Beside him, Brent and Chase high-fived like they'd just won a championship. "Thought we'd add a little color to your day," Logan said loudly, his voice rising above the laughter. "Try to make you feel more at home." More laughter. Cruel, delighted, contagious. Nia stood frozen for half a breath, her fingers curled into fists. She could feel it, the heat rising behind her eyes. Not fear, not even anger. Something deeper, something breaking. Nyla reached up slowly and wiped at one of the words with the sleeve of her blazer. The red smeared, then bled across the gray fabric like a wound. No one noticed her shaking hand, but they would. Later, in the girls' restroom, they stood at the sink in silence, scrubbing the paint from their fingers with paper towels that scratched more than they cleaned. "No, Boston." "No," Nyla said finally, her voice quiet but forged in steel. Nia met her sister's eyes in the mirror. She didn't need to ask what she meant. She just nodded. No more. That afternoon it happened. Logan and his crew were waiting, of course. They always were. This time it wasn't subtle. As the sisters crossed the courtyard, Logan stepped forward, spreading his arms as if to embrace a spotlight. "Still here?" he called. "Didn't get the message this morning?" His voice bounced off the stone walls like a shot. Students slowed, stopped. A crowd began to form, drawn not by concern but by the promise of a scene. "Guess some people just don't take a hint," Brent added, strolling to Logan's side with practiced arrogance. Nyla and Nia kept walking, not faster, not slower, but with eyes locked. Logan stepped directly into their path. "So what's the deal?" he sneered. "You two planning to cry again? Or run back to Daddy?" That was it. That was the line. Nyla stopped, turned, looked at him. Her voice came out calm, but it carried like thunder. "No, we're done running." Logan didn't even have time to react. She moved first. One clean strike to the chest. Not wild, not angry, but precise. He stumbled backward. The wind knocked from his lungs. Nia, in the same breath, dropped low and swept Brent's legs out from under him. He hit the stone hard, gasping. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Shock, then awe. Someone tried to laugh, but it died in their throat. Because now they saw it, not anger, not recklessness, training, discipline, control. Logan scrambled to his feet, red-faced, swinging wildly. But Nyla moved like water, ducking beneath, then rising with a sharp, practiced palm to his jaw. He fell again, and stayed down. Nia turned to Chase, who had backed up 3 steps, then froze. She didn't touch him. She just looked. And he ran. The courtyard was silent now. No laughter, no taunts, just the sound of breath. Heavy, honest. The kind of breath people take when they've seen something real. The fight at school didn't go unnoticed. Not this time. By the end of the day, the video had already made its rounds. Grainy phone footage of Nyla and Nia moving like a single wave through chaos, dismantling Logan and his crew with effortless precision. The comments online split into 2 camps, those who cheered for them and those who clung to the lie that the girls had snapped. By evening, the Whitmores were no longer humiliated. They were furious, and they weren't just looking for revenge. They wanted control back. They came after dark. A black SUV rolled up to the curb of the Thompsons' modest brick home like a threat disguised as civility. Its engine idled for too long, its headlights casting long shadows across the porch. Inside, Malcolm Thompson was already waiting. He had been sitting at the kitchen table when the rumble pulled into the driveway. He didn't rise in haste. He didn't speak. He simply stood, smooth and steady, and glanced toward his daughters. "Stay inside," he said softly. Not out of fear, out of example. He opened the door before they could knock. Greg Whitmore was already halfway up the path, his fists clenched, his chest heaving with the heat of manufactured outrage. Sandra Whitmore trailed behind him, face twisted with fury that had been waiting for permission to explode. "You think you can lay your hands on my son and walk away clean?" Greg shouted, storming up the steps. Malcolm didn't flinch. "Your son assaulted my daughters. They defended themselves." "Don't play that victim card with me," Sandra snapped, stepping forward in sharp heels that stabbed the porch boards with every click. "Your animals attacked my boy, and now they've got the whole school turning in him." Malcolm's eyes were still, unblinking, not a flicker of rage, not a hint of apology. "You came to my house," he said, voices stone. "You brought this here." Greg lunged. It was fast, sloppy, the kind of swing that comes from a man used to getting his way, not used to being tested. Malcolm caught his wrist before the punch could land, not with violence but with command. He twisted just enough, not to break, just to redirect. Greg stumbled, losing his balance, and hit the railing with a grunt. Sandra screamed. She surged forward, clawing for Malcolm's arm, but he stepped aside like wind slipping past stone. With practiced grace, he caught her wrist too firmly, but without harm. "This ends now," Malcolm said, his voice quiet, "before you embarrass yourselves further." But they didn't hear him. Not really. They were too deep in their pride, too fueled by the disbelief that someone like him had turned the tables. Greg recovered, breath ragged, and charged again. This time, Malcolm didn't wait. He moved with precision, sidestepping, using Greg's weight against him. One fluid motion, a twist, a fall. Greg hit the porch hard. The breath was knocked clean from his lungs. Sandra rushed toward him, but Malcolm stood between them. "You thought you could walk into my home and rewrite the truth," he said, voice low and calm. "But you forgot one thing. This house doesn't run on fear." The sirens came then, faint at first, then louder. Neighbors stood on their lawns, arms folded, silent witnesses. Some recording, others are implying watching. Sandra shrieked, pointing wildly. "He attacked us! Arrest him! Do you know who we are?" But her voice cracked. It didn't carry the power it used to, not in the face of what people had seen with their own eyes. Malcolm didn't move as the police pulled up, lights strobing across his front yard. He stood tall, flanked by his daughters, now standing quietly behind him. They had watched it all, every motion, every decision, their father's stillness, his control, his refusal to stoop. The officers stepped out, cautious, hands near their LTs. Greg was still on the porch, gasping, Sandra wild-eyed. Malcolm steady as ever. When the officer asked what happened, Malcolm didn't raise his voice. "They came here uninvited. They threatened my family." He threw the first punch. I responded with restraint. And for the first time that day, silence was on their side. The flashing red and blue lights pulsed across the brick walls of the Thompson home like a warning to the night. Something had shifted here. Officer Klein stepped out of the patrol car with calm authority. He wasn't here to escalate. He was here to observe, to read. And what he saw in seconds told him more than words ever could. Greg Whitmore, red-faced, winded, sitting on the porch with a torn cuff and bruised pride. Sandra was pacing, frantic, shouting about assault and violence in our town, and Malcolm Thompson, standing firm, not gloating, not shaken, just centered. Then Klein saw the girls, Nyla and Nia, standing behind their father, not cowering, not trembling, their eyes calm, their posture straight. They weren't hiding. They weren't waiting to be saved. They were witnesses. Sandra lunged first. "Officer, he attacked us. We were just defending ourselves." Klein raised a hand. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. I'll speak to everyone, but I'll start with the homeowner." Her mouth hung open, caught mid-excuse, but she obeyed. Malcolm nodded once, slow and measured. "They came to our home, angry, looking for a fight. He struck first." Klein listened, no rush, no assumptions. Then the neighbors stepped forward. One by one, their voices cut through the air like quiet knives. "I saw it all. He attacked first." She was screaming at his daughters. They were calm. They didn't provoke anything. By the time Klein turned back to Sandra and Greg, the panic had taken root. Their confidence, once so sharp, now flailed in empty words. Greg tried again. "This is ridiculous. We're the victims here." But his voice cracked on the word victims. He didn't believe it anymore. Klein didn't argue. He didn't need to. The evidence was everywhere. In the testimonies, the doorbell footage, the silence of a neighborhood that had seen too much for too long. "I'm placing you both under arrest for trespassing, harassment, and assault," Klein said, his tone even. "Anything further will be sorted at the station." The handcuffs clicked like punctuation. Sandra screamed. Greg cursed. But no one moved to help them, because the truth had settled now, heavy and final. This was never about a fight. It was about control, and they had lost it. Inside the police car, Sandra kept shouting. Outside, the night began to breathe again. Malcolm turned to his daughters. "You did well," he said, not because they fought, but because they stood. The next morning, Woodbridge Academy was quieter than usual. Students didn't laugh. They didn't whisper. They watched, eyes heavy with realization. Because the news had spread, the footage, the arrest, the truth. Logan and his crew, expelled. The school's silence, broken. And the Thompsons, restored. When Nyla and Nia walked through the halls, no one blocked their path. Teachers greeted them by name. The whispers, once sharp and cruel, were now absent, not because people had changed, but because something had. Respect doesn't come from fear, it comes from clarity. And now there was no more doubt about who they were. Not victims, not troublemakers, not outsiders. They were home. And no one would ever take that from them again. Message of the story: when dignity meets discipline, no amount of hate can break you. You don't have to yell to be strong, you just have to stand.